Hi, I'm Dr. Sarah Hensley. I'm a specialized social psychologist who's been studying the science of attachment and attraction inside romantic relationships for over 15 years. And in this video, I want to introduce you to attachment science. Attachment science has been around for many decades. It was started in the 1950s by a man named John Bowlby, and it has been further refined in thousands of empirical studies ever since. Modern day attachment theory does a really good job of explaining how and why people behave the way that they do inside of romantic relationships. So, in this video, I'm going to give you a high-level overview of each of the attachment styles. Attachment science really shows that people fit into one of four attachment boxes pretty well. Now, usually in psychology, we can't put people into boxes very well, but attachment is really sort of a special case scenario. These boxes actually fit individuals extremely well. So let's go over those four attachment styles. We have secure, anxious preoccupied, dismissive avoidant, and fearful avoidant, and I'm going to describe them in that order. So, attachment is really on a spectrum, and in the center of that spectrum, we consider those individuals in this space to be securely attached. So, what can securely attached people do that insecurely attached people struggle with? Well, they are very good at a number of very healthy relationship behaviors, such as communicating openly and respectfully, being appropriately vulnerable inside of their relationships, so they're able to discuss their own feelings, but make space and room to hear, listen, and understand someone else's emotions as well. They do a really good job of both self-regulating their own nervous system when they're upset, as well as leaning into their partner and co-regulating or soothing their partner's nervous system when their partner is upset. They can draw appropriate boundaries around their needs being met inside of a relationship, and they are very good at picking up on the needs of others and meeting those needs. So they have no fears around intimacy, but they're not overly vulnerable at the same time. So they don't do what's called emotionally dumping, where they just reveal everything about themselves. They are appropriately vulnerable. So they share what needs to be shared, and they can do so in a way that doesn't cause them fear. Securely attached people handle conflict in a very toned down, respectful, and calm way. So securely attached people don't get too upset during conflict. They take a calm, rational stance around problem solving while also attending to the emotions of themselves and others inside of the conflict situation. How did they develop this kind of attachment? Well, they usually had parents that stayed together and had a healthy romantic relationship where these skills were modeled to that person. Parents also did a good job of emotional attunement with their kids. They learned how to give proper emotional support, as well as really fostering the tools around how to self-regulate one's own nervous system. So parents did a really, really good job of providing lots of support as the child was younger, and then slowly backing off of that support and allowing the child to take over their own regulation more and more as they aged. Now, they really understand that co-regulation is an important piece. So being attentive and attuned to their child's emotions showed them what it's like to invite someone in to share and to allow someone else to soothe their own nervous system. So that's how the skills of self-regulation and co-regulation developed simultaneously for the securely attached individual. Now, let's talk about deviating from the secure spectrum. On this side of the attachment spectrum, we have attachment anxiety. And individuals that only stay on that side of the spectrum are what we call anxious preoccupied. The anxious preoccupied person usually experienced a childhood where parents were pretty good at love, affection, and emotional attunement, but the parents were somewhat inconsistent in giving that. So when they did give it, they did a great job, but there was something going on that caused them to be inconsistent. This could have been stress within their own world. So maybe job stress, maybe working a lot of hours that made them unavailable. It could have been that there was a big family with a lot of kids, and so nobody got that individual attention. It could be because maybe there was an elderly grandparent in the picture that had to be cared for and that took away from the parent's ability to attend to their children. So no matter how you look at it, they had an issue with emotional consistency and regulation. Okay, so individuals who have anxious preoccupied attachment often really struggle with being able to tolerate space inside of a relationship. So they definitely struggle with someone moving away from them in the relationship. They have a really big bucket of needs, and they are always seeking to connect, more emotional connection, more emotional attunement. Okay. And so they are really, really, really trying to reel their partner in for closeness and connection. They want their partner to deeply stay connected to them sort of at all times. And they're always looking for reassurance and the stability of their relationship and reassurance of their partner's feelings for them. So because they can be a little bit too needy, too clingy, and have too big of a needs bucket, they can often push people away, which is the very thing that they fear. They struggle with wounds around not feeling good enough, feeling excluded, or abandoned inside of relationships. And so when they're too needy and they push someone away, it really fulfills this idea that people will always abandon me and I'm not good enough to be loved. So anxious, preoccupied people tend to be very warm, loving, tender-hearted people, but they really, really struggle with tolerating any kind of distance. And so even normal and healthy space inside of a relationship can feel really, really bad to the anxious, preoccupied person. During conflict, they tend to get a little bit emotional, usually in the form of tears or just really heavy emotions. They're not necessarily super emotionally reactive outside of crying or just being in their feelings of sadness or loneliness. They can often do a fawn response. So they can kind of drop their boundaries and back up and say, you're right, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this to be a conflict. I take it back. You're right, I'm wrong. In order to stop the conflict when they feel like conflict could potentially lead to abandonment. So we actually have someone that is the complete opposite of that. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the fearful avoidant. The dismissive avoidant. So dismissive avoidants grew up with emotional neglect. So they did not receive proper emotional attunement inside of their romantic relationships. What this did was to imprint them with wounds around defectiveness and feeling like their own emotions are wrong to feel and other people's emotions shouldn't be something that they have any business dealing with. And so they were also pushed into hyper-independence really early on inside of childhood. And what this does is it makes them, one, really fear emotional vulnerability, and two, be hyper-focused on self. So they sort of grow up with these blinders on, really attuned to their own path inside of a relationship. They struggle to meet people's needs. They can show up really strong in the beginning of relationships, but as soon as the commitment creeps up or there's conflict at play, they will start to deactivate or move away from the partner. So they are individuals that are always sort of creating space inside of a relationship. They tend to back away or really be triggered by closeness and by conflict. So what does this look like in the context of an adult romantic relationship? They tend to deprioritize their partner. They tend to focus on their own needs. They fail to observe the needs of others, and they really create way too much space, as well as lack appropriate emotional vulnerability for true intimacy inside of a relationship. So the partner of the DA often complains that I don't feel like you know me. I don't feel like you see me. I don't know you. You don't share anything. You're really focused on your own time and not spending time with me. So they're just too distant inside of a relationship. They're very sensitive to criticism also, because when they're criticized, it really hits on that defectiveness wound, and they will just shut down, feeling shame and hopelessness, and then going into emotional suppression. So as little children, when their emotions were dismissed, the only thing they learned to do was to shut their emotions down, suppress them, and distract into things that they felt competent with, which is often why they become workaholics or hobbyaholics inside of relationships and deprioritize their romantic partner. Okay, now lastly, we have this combination attachment style called fearful avoidance. And fearful avoidance have both an anxious side and an avoidant side, so they can really slide up and down the entire attachment spectrum. Fearful avoidance is caused when there is at least one dysfunctional parent inside of childhood and there is some kind of trauma. So if it wasn't the parent causing the trauma, it could be someone else that caused the trauma and it gets imprinted as my parent didn't protect me, therefore they are not a functional parent inside of the relationship. So the parent doesn't even have to be the one that does the damage directly. They sort of subconsciously get the blame for any of that trauma that the child experienced. But the most common types of trauma I see are parents that fight all the time and are very emotionally dysregulated, a parent with a mental illness, a parent with a substance abuse problem, a nasty divorce that happens between parents when children are younger. There could be physical, emotional, verbal, or sexual abuse in the home. Those are the things that I really see that cause a break in trust between the child and one or more of their caregivers. And so when this break in trust occurs, the child really learns, well, if I can't trust anyone else, or my own parents, how could I even trust anyone else? And so the largest wound that forms is around betrayal. So fearful avoidants take on a number of characteristics to sort of navigate their betrayal wound. One, they're very hypervigilant. So they really put people under a microscope and really focus on all the ways that their partner is letting them down because they expect to be hurt subconsciously. Okay, they tend to be emotionally reactive. So they are more of the fighters during conflict. They either start out fighting and then quickly lose steam and go into their avoidant side and shut down, or they will hold it in, withhold it, bottle it up until it all spills out in a fight response. Fearful avoidance can really ping pong between that fight and that flight response inside of relationships when they are triggered. They really expect people to mind read, so they really want people to observe them and swoop in and meet their needs without having to ask. For them, having to ask for a need to be met means that it just didn't count. Fearful avoidance can really oscillate between that anxiety and that avoidance, so they can really seek out connection only to feel like they're hurt or about to be hurt and push that partner away really, really hard. So you can see that that's a very disorganized pattern of relating. And so that's why sometimes I call it the grasping at straws attachment. They're really trying whatever works to try to get their partner's attention. Their deepest need inside of a relationship is not only to trust their partner, but to be seen, heard, and understood on a deep level. To them, that really equates trust. If you see me and hear me and know me deeply, then I can trust you. If you ignore my needs and if you don't understand me, then how could I possibly trust you with my heart? So fearful avoidants really want love, but they're deeply afraid of being hurt at the same time, which can allow them to get close just to push somebody away again. Fearful avoidants tend to lean to the anxious space or lean to the dismissive space, and they'll always act in opposition to their partner. So a fearful avoidant with a dismissive avoidant will be very anxious, whereas a fearful avoidant with an anxious preoccupied will be very avoidant. So they tend to really struggle to get on the same page as their partner. So hopefully this video helps you self-identify your attachment as well as the attachment style of your partner. Now, as I proceed on my channel, I'm going to give you so many tools on how to work through your insecure attachments to really be able to meet the needs of your partner as well as get your needs met inside of a relationship.